Oh my God, my people, you're all here.
We're
I like
here.
seeing both of your faces.
Same here.
It's
We are
just nice because I mean,
so
I
here.
I see you both very like socially passive. You know, like I see your things come up, and I engage and I watch from the sidelines and say, yes, good work you're doing out there.
You
But
do
it's
such
nice.
an excellent job of the like. It's so good.
I do. I'm very good at the like.
You
Yeah. But it's really nice to talk to both of you like in person, especially
ditto.
Yes.
amidst the craziness that is going on right now. I mean,
What could you possibly be referring to?
for realsies, I mean, Twitter.
You mean the dystopian end of capitalism?
Late stage capitalism is such
The
a.
blue
Let's
place.
stage
It's just the blue place.
the
We have
blue
such
plays.
wild storylines going on right now. I feel like the AI that's controlling our simulation is definitely a little buggy at the moment.
Oh, 1,000,000%. Like nobody QA'd this before it was out of production. Like they're just
No.
like, let's publish live. What's the worst that could happen? And now everybody's like, maybe we should hire more people for a QA team.
Yeah. The writer's
Yeah.
room of this reality is definitely a little too high on something.
On something. Yeah. There
Yeah.
was a little too much Prosecco.
Yeah,
There was just
prior
a
to the
little too
writing.
much prior to the writing. 1
Yeah.
million percent. It's wild. It's absolutely bananas wild. And I come from tech, right? So to me, I'm like watching, like I'm in publishing now, but I was in tech for years, like the better part of a decade. And I'm watching all of this and I'm like, this was a good time to get out of tech.
No kidding.
I made a great choice. Yeah.
So
It's
like
wild.
this isn't what our topic of discussion is, but I have to ask you both because it's a thing that I'm currently thinking about. So this morning I went to an NSA event, National Speakers Association. It was a Philly event,
Okay.
not NSA like the spies. Or,
I was
like,
like the
I was like, wait.
spies?
I was
Yeah.
like,
well, it's
More.
like I think there's also a CIA, which is a Culinary Institute of America. So I've heard people say that, and I'm like, yo, I always thought you were into cooking, but like now you're doing this James Bond thing. Anyway, I went to this NSA event this morning. So you're indulging my ADHD. And there's an amazing speaker, Ramon Ray, and he was talking about content and personal branding and these things. And a lot of it was about like social media and branding. And you are an absolute like maven that I look up to. I don't have the level of comfort yet to publish as with the frequency with which you do on social media, and your content's amazing. But back to my original question, which was going to be, how are you both feeling about publishing on these platforms in light of all of the garbage that is happening at these platforms? So I recently left Twitter because I was like, deuces on this horrible dumpster fire. But LinkedIn's no better. Like they're silencing Black creators who even dare to write the word white. And TikTok has its problems, and Instagram has its problems, and Facebook, the entire company of Meta Facebook, is just an absolute dumpster fire place. And yet these are the platforms we have audiences and connect. And I'm constantly struggling with, I want to build audiences and talk about things that are important, et cetera, et cetera. But every contribution to these platforms helps them to monetize horribleness. How are either of you feeling about that before we get into like leadership and things, which is this related?
I've never been on, I was never on Twitter, and now I'm really glad I have not been. Because I'd never saw any value in it. But as far as the other platforms, especially, like LinkedIn, right? It's tough because you kind of have to be there because that's where people are. You kind of have to go where people are, right? I feel the same way about Facebook. Like so many people still use Facebook. You have to reach out to them somehow. And that means for you as an individual, as a leader in those spaces, you have to expose yourself to some of the toxicity that's in those spaces, and you have to accept that as, if you're trying to do good in that space, you also have to accept the bad, right? Like, we make the same choice whenever we go into, like, whenever we make career choices, right? Is, hey, this company, they do a lot of great work, but they work with this one entity that I don't like, right? Or like, there's always trade-offs, and I think that you're never going to find a perfect solution.
Yeah.
And especially with 8 billion people in the world now, that is how many different variabilities and permutations of choice and chance do we have? It's like infinite at this point. So I'm sure you could calculate it, but who wants to? But yeah, I just don't. I think that for us to connect in certain spaces, we have to accept the bad
Everyone
stuff.
will fail the purity test, basically.
Yeah,
Everyone
exactly.
fails the purity test. Everyone fails the purity test. And I agree in so many ways, Chris, which is I see it. So I'm a marketer. I'm a marketer by trade. I've been in marketing now for the better part of 2 decades. And so my mantra has always been, and so I grew up in an age, I came up in marketing in an age where social didn't actually exist in its current form. So to me, this whole like, you have to be on, so it's actually a very new phenomenon for all you youngsters out there. It's very, very new. Like it wasn't like we always have to have a presence on TikTok.
For our Gen Z audience.
For our Gen Z audience, y'all, like this was not always the way it was. Also, none of us had cell phones growing up or computers in many ways.
You've got mail.
But amazing, amazing. So I've always, so from a purely marketing technical perspective, my mantra has always been, don't build your house on rented land. And that's basically what a lot of these folks have done. I was actually just having a conversation with my wife this morning around how bad I feel for all the folks who spent years building immense platforms on Twitter and are now watching their life's work in many ways absolutely be set aflame. Just set aflame, because people are leaving that platform in droves. Brands are simply not advertising anymore. There's basically like 3 people at Twitter now being like, how do we keep this online? Like it's a dumpster fire of epic proportions. And that's the dangers, again, of building your house on borrowed land, is at any point in time, somebody can swoop in and be like, by the way, I'm leasing this to someone else, skadoosh. So there you have that. So that's the one thing. But then you also have, Chris, what you're saying, which is, if we actually want to reach audiences, which I know all of us do, like it's I feel like the glue that binds us 3 of us together is that we want to do immense good in the world. Like we want to, it's like we want to ring and sound the alarm on the awareness that is necessary to live in the 3-cornered house of white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism. And we want to call it out. And we're like, we're stuck in it. We're stuck living in this house, but you don't have to live in this house without awareness of what's happening in the rooms. Right? That is the thing that we spend our time doing. But in order for us to make that message heard, we have to be in the rooms of the house. And the rooms of the house are LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and corporate America. And we just have to be in those. And so it's like, the way that I reconcile with it is, I can be in this house. I am a product of this house. But I can make sure that my walls are painted the way that I want them. And I can make sure that the sofas that I have in this house are my sofas. And I can make sure that if any dickwad comes into my rooms that is spouting off like horrible shit, bye, I get out of my house. I get out of my house. And that's kind of how I reconcile with it, because I'm not going to leave. I left Twitter because I was never on it to begin with. I was like a lurker for the longest time. And I was like, I can't get into this. It was never my vibe. But I love LinkedIn. Like I love it so much. It's such an incredible community. And I don't want to leave it, but I also don't want to exist in it without making an impact. So that's how I'm reconciling it. It's like, I'm going to be as loud as I freaking possibly can to make a difference within my 3-cornered house.
I think where I struggle is generally less with the people on the platform, although I think there's a lot there. I struggle with the ethics of the platform itself. And that's often where I get really hung up, is like, it's like that old saying that like, you can't, I forget the old saying is, but like, there's like, you can't make change unless you have a seat at the table. And then there's also, it's hard to actually start a revolution from inside the system. Right. So a lot of what we're talking about is in many ways like revolutionary ideas of how companies should be run, how leaders should behave, how we should treat one another, what's acceptable, all these different things. Like these are ideas that we want to spread and we want to talk about. And to all of your points is like, you have to be in the room where people are. It's no good to like, you know, like I love Tumblr as a platform, but like if I go there and I start shouting all day long, like there's just not as much of an audience there is on Facebook. Like I've tried to leave Facebook a number of times, and I'm like, dude, like it's just the place where I get the most engagement, bar none, no matter what. So how do you leave that? Even though I think Mark Zuckerberg is like an evil alien robot sent to destroy us. But how do you leave that? Right? How do you, you know, shoot yourself in the foot? You know, when important discussions have to be had. So I struggle with the ethics of like, where do you live your values versus where do you have to kind of compromise them in service of the greater good? How do you do that weighing? But But anyway, that's a whole rabbit hole we could go down. Today, though, I'm going to segue us into the conversation of today, which is about leadership and the lack thereof and the lack of the humanity thereof. And I think a beautiful segue is to talk about what's going on at Twitter right now as a way to lead into this conversation, right? We slightly brought it up, but people are resigning in droves. People are being fired in droves. Critical features like, I don't know, security are being shut off just because they're micro features to Elon. And there's ultimatums and lines being drawn about how many hours you have to be in the office and sleeping in the office and what it means to be intense and all of that sort of stuff. So just as a blanket of that being a real snapshot of what's happening out there in a lot of places about what's expected of labor. What's your take on the current state of what we're seeing in leadership using Twitter as our first starting point?
Well, let me actually start with something that's like counterintuitive to like what the three of us believe is that there are going to be people who are drawn to this type of culture and environment.
Mhm.
There are going to be people who are willing to sacrifice themselves for this type of environment. So I can't say that, yes, while I would think that a majority of society would look at, if we were to remove Elon Musk's name and just say, this is a person doing these things, I think most of society would be like, that person is toxic, they're abusive, and they should not be in a leadership position. But because of the name and the clout that he brings, people are going to be drawn to that and to his values. And so I don't want to bash those people first and foremost. The other thing that has been brought up in the last 24 hours has been that there are some people who are stuck there because of visa issues, right? They
Mhm.
need this job because they are supporting their families or themselves, and they cannot or do not want to go back to their
I hadn't even
countries,
thought of that.
right? So we need to just kind of keep those things in mind, right? Like some people are literally stuck there because they cannot sacrifice what they have. Like they'll sacrifice themselves to support like their families or other things. So just think of it like that. But to the main point is, you see how quickly toxic and negative leadership can affect an organization. We're looking at 3 weeks now. He's been in charge of
Yeah.
Twitter.
Feels like a
Mhm.
month and a half. It feels like a
I
year
yeah,
almost.
but like when you talk about how negative and toxic people can infiltrate a culture and destroy a culture from the inside out, we are literally seeing this in real time in 3
Right.
weeks time. That is not a lot of time in the business world. And
No.
it is insane, right? Like we talk about like, hey, like this, negative Nancy over here on this team, like they affect affect the whole team and maybe even the whole organization. But we're willing to do it because they bring results, right?
Right.
And it just kind of simmers. But we're seeing this happening so fast, and that there's going to be so many case studies on this in the future. Like it's a living case study now, but you just
That's
know
exactly
it's like,
right.
yeah, it is absolutely insane.
I was just saying to my friend, we were texting the other day, I was saying, this is the next Apple TV exclusive show, is like the crash of Twitter.
I
Bluebird
hope
down.
not. Like, I hope not.
Yeah.
Because to me, this is the kind of thing. I mean, yes, it will be. I really wish it wasn't, because this is the kind of thing that needs to be studied almost anonymously, just to remove the clout. Again, to your point, Chris, of the name. Like, this isn't a thing to glorify. It's to me, it's really interesting because I think what you pointed out, Chris, is so savvy, which is there are humans that are stuck inside these downfalls. There are humans that are stuck inside these decisions. There are, and ultimately it's it's actually rare that this happens. I should point out, it's unusual outside of like dictatorships and coups that a single individual has this level of destructive power. Like it's much more often a slow decline, like a slow, like, oh, this is kind of sucking. Oh no, bad leadership. Like it's like a slow-mo, right? But we have a question. Sean McCormick, anyone know or heard about what job types or roles are being eliminated at Twitter? Everything, Sean. The answer to that question is everything.
I saw one yesterday that the guy, I think it was a guy that was in charge of the badges, like that actually got you in and out of the offices, was fired, and then they called him and were like, "Hey, we can't get into the building. Can you let us back in?"
Well, there was the story that was making the rounds yesterday was like 50 people quit, but then they couldn't get out of their parking garage because their badges weren't working. So facilities had to come out with a sawzall and literally cut them out, right? Like it would almost be comical if it
Yeah.
wasn't so tragic. Like it's the watching the demise of what is essentially a bastion of our modern age in terms of technology is unbelievable. Like we're literally watching history and it's so bizarre. But I think though the important thing to point, one of the important things to point out to me in this environment is the tech world right now is on fire. It's not just Twitter. Like Twitter is the thing that's dominating the headlines, but it's important to remember that that's not actually the norm or what is actually happening. Like there are a tremendous amount of layoffs that are occurring that are even outside of Twitter. Twitter is the dumpster fire that keeps gas all the time, but that's because you have Elon with a fire hose of gasoline that's just kind of like, ah, and just laughing. He's Nero.
He has a
right? Like,
flamethrower, right? It's the
yeah, he's
flamethrower that he's
Nero.
got.
But you have to like consider what actually has happened because Elon is a case study in inhumanity and anti-humanity that is happening right now, 1,000,000%. But the other things that we really have to pay attention to are the Amazons, right? Like what was the other one that had like 13, like there's been so many. I can't keep Stripe. Stripe was the other one that had, and so, and also like so many others. Like I'm forgetting all of them, and I should not. But there's
Well,
a
Facebook
whole
was like
list.
11,000 based on the bet
Facebook,
of, yeah.
Amazon, Stripe. And so the thing to remember, I think that where the meatiest part of this conversation potentially is how do you do layoffs humanely? And and how it is humanity actually happening right now? Like is there a level of humanity that is occurring right now? And it's hard to figure it out because I'm torn because on the one hand, for example, I think the way that Amazon is doing things, and I think the way that Facebook did things, and I think the way that Stripe also did things is almost like the best case scenario, but it's still kind of fucking horrible. Like they sent an email ahead of time saying, y'all, we're going to lay off some people. So stay tuned. If you get an email, then it's you. And then so everybody's like, ah, and then they send the email. Now the email has stuff in it that is actually as humane as you possibly can. Like here's 6 months of salary in some cases. We're going to continue your benefits. Like there's a lot of here. We're going to help you with job search. We're going to do all this. And it's there, but you still got a mass communication to tell you that you were gone. And so when I hear people praising that, like, oh my God, look at how amazing Facebook was. And look at how amazing Stripe was. And look at it. I'm like, actually, no, nobody praised that shit because that's baseline. Baseline. Please don't praise baseline. That's what should always fucking happen. And even then, you still didn't say it to anybody's face. You sent an email. You sent an email.
It's so interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, Jeff, go for it.
I was going to say, what I find interesting about that, what you pointed out, is that like on the bigger company side of things, you have the better treatment from a financial and a benefits perspective because they have the ability to do that. But you get the impersonality, the inhumanity of like, you're a number that got an email in a BCC line probably, or in Twitter's case on the CC line. I don't know if you heard about that, but that was the thing that happened.
I did not, but like a nightmare reply all. But
can you imagine that? On the other side, you've got small businesses or smaller businesses that when they lay people off, they may not have the financial bandwidth to be able to take care of people in the same way, but they may be able to have a more humane conversation. And I think a lot of the work that the three of us have done, or the places where we coach people, we create content, we talk about, is how do you do things in a human way? How do you connect with people? And how do you try to take care of people? In my case, lovable leadership. How do you love people even as you're having to get rid of them? How do you do as right by them as you possibly can? But I think that if you zoom out one more level, probably the bigger picture is this actually isn't an individual company or corporation or leader level. This is a societal systemic social safety net sort of conversation, which is that when somebody's being fired, they shouldn't lose their health care. They shouldn't lose all of their money and benefits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's probably the bigger issue is like we zoom out, we're trying to attack this at a company by company level. Some companies are going to be awful. Some are going to be great, but overall it should be that nobody is harmed.
Right.
Well, I think here I'll use my own horrifying experience, right? When I was laid off at my last organization, they could only afford to give 1 week of severance to everyone in the organization. They laid off half of the company, including like critical functions of the organization, right? And so, like it's Jeff, to your point, companies can only do so much, right? Like some companies can only do so much.
You either have the money or you don't, right?
Right. And look, it sucks, yeah, but there's something else to be said. What the team at Indelible Impressions and I were talking about yesterday during our team meeting was like, well, what is that like next level of humanity? How do you lead like with people more in mind? Because yes, there is the financial aspect. What is the direct impact of someone losing their job? What we don't talk about and we don't currently support, and Anna, I would love to get your feedback on this, is what are we doing for that person's mental and emotional well-being? Because it's not just, hey, this person has lost a part of their identity. Hey, this person has just lost financial security. It is also what's going on with them internally. How do we support them there? How do we support them through this grieving period? How do we support their families that now have to shift what they're doing, right? Their families have to adjust. Their social circles have to adjust. It is far beyond the one level ripple. It is continuing on. So at what point do organizations take a look at and see, hey, this is going to impact more than just that one individual, right? Thousands of times over or hundreds of times over. But how do we address their own support so they can feel supported as well? They feel like, hey, yes, I'm actually being taken care of. And some of the things that I'm seeing right now is through all of these layoffs is, how do you, as an organization, can you help the people that you just laid off? Can you help them build a community and build a insular community around them? So you say, hey, this is the group that was laid off. Let's get you all together. Let's start sharing resources. For us as an organization, here's all the resources and people that we can help you with, like with connections and networking, things like that. And here is an additional layer outside of that of people that can provide additional emotional and mental and like psychological safety and well-being and support so you can move forward. That's what I'm seeing a lot of people gravitate to, is because now more than ever, we need that community. And because it's, if you look at layoffs.fyi, it's over 130,000 people so far that have been laid off this year. It's nuts. It's a lot of people.
And that's just in the tech space. I believe that's just in the tech space. It's such an interesting question, Chris, that you bring up, is because you're like, how do organizations provide or rather think beyond the immediate, right? Like, how do organizations, they're like, okay, we have to lay off, we'll use a round number, like X number, 100 people, we have to lay them off. All right, well, let's make sure we give them severance. Let's make sure they have their health insurance. Let's make sure, but then in addition to, let's make sure that they feel supported. Let's make sure that they have emotional well-being. Let's make sure that they have, and all of these things are great, by the way, like this is not me, but you're asking the question of how do we ensure that, or how do we make it? And I think the answer is, I don't think that's ever going to happen, except outside some very, very limited instances, because ultimately, as Sean, who's in our comments, pointed out, is they have a sharp budget knife. Ultimately, layoffs are a question of a profit and loss, and it is a budget line. And you can absolutely message it differently. You can absolutely provide the support that you can, or you can provide the support that you can in terms of like money, in terms of like health insurance. But organizations aren't, for the most part, that invested in an employee's well-being outside of their organization. They just aren't. And so what you're asking for is systemic shift in the way that companies look at their employees and have them look at them beyond the functions and the outcomes and start looking at them as the human beings that they are. And that's literally why us three and many countless other people don't stop yelling about this shit, because that's the thing that's missing. So how do we change it? I have no idea. That's like saying, well, how do we wipe out homophobia? I don't know. Like, like I don't think there's a way to do that. It's you have to go, and it's endemic, I think, certainly to the American way of thinking, which is we tend to not often think about the group or the community. What we tend to think about is the individual. And that, because that is so ingrained in the way that we think about things, and that is so, we're so ingrained in our own progress and our own forward motion and our own this and our own, all of it our own. And that if we get married, like, okay, well, you spouse, you come here, and if then you have kids, okay, kids, you do. But we all, it's like we all just move individually. There's a tremendous lack of concern around the community well-being. And so until you change the way America thinks, I don't actually believe you're going to see a change in the way companies consider their employees post-employment.
I 100% agree with you. And I think that's actually been the fundamental thing that if there's anything that I shout about, it's that I feel like we put too much pressure on companies to solve problems that really shouldn't be the company's purview. It should be us as a society taking care of one another collectively. We're talking like there are some companies like Google, for instance, I believe provides housing. Chris, you brought up earlier, Twitter providing visas. There are all of these things that we're asking companies that we know are concerned primarily with their bottom
line. They provide healthcare. Like healthcare is a great example. Why do you need to have a job in order to be able to go to the doctor and not going bankrupt?
Yeah.
That when you say it like that, it's bananas.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think you're right. We cannot solve this at the company level. And I think even attempting to is part of that same idea of addressing things individually rather than systemically. I think if we have a growth imperative amongst companies, then even the companies that want to do right are putting themselves at a disadvantage in a competitive environment against cutthroat competitors. So why take care of your people? That's so expensive. Why take care of them on the way out? Why build these communities for them? Why take care of their healthcare or their visa or their housing or any of these things after they leave? It's hard enough and expensive enough while they're here, but let alone after they leave. And we're just going to not have money to reinvest as these other bigger companies eat our lunch and buy up our competitors. So if that's the environment, how do you stop that and even for us, we talk to individual leaders and we're like, how do you create environments of care, trust, and safety? How do we do that? Okay, that's great. And we can make impact there. And there's definitely like the lives that those people touch are valuable as anything that we do. But we're not going to make a dent in the problem until the problem is dealt with at a systemic level, I don't think.
That's exactly right. Like what we're addressing is and we'll talk about layoffs because layoffs is what's happening right now. But as layoffs are happening, that is a symptom of an illness. That is not the illness itself. As much as I hate to say it, it is the symptom of an illness. And every time I talk about this a lot at work, like when we keep trying to fix the thing and it just keeps getting broken, it's what we're creating is a Band-Aid ball. Like we just keep slapping one more Band-Aid on it. And eventually what happens is the Band-Aid ball just falls apart. It just falls apart because the core is what's rotten. Right? The core is what's rotten. But again, you're stuck in the fact that we live again in that three-cornered house, right? It's your white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism. And so how do you keep that house? Like you have to basically raise the house, but when you raise the house, you're raising the society. And when you're raising the society, you have to rebuild it. And that's like, that goes even beyond systemic change. That goes back to like Tyler Durden setting off shit and like that's what you're doing, right? And are we ready for Tyler Durden to blow shit up?
I mean, if you've seen Mr. Robot, which in many ways is a little bit of like a philosophical continuation of it, like what would the aftermath of that be like? It is not pretty. It's not great.
It isn't. I mean, now granted, we are very much careening to a like dystopian hellscape. So hey, who knows?
Yeah.
But but that's the question, right? Like it's when you start peeling back the Band-Aids and you keep going, oh shit, oh God. And you just keep going down and deeper and deeper. It's like, where do you actually fix it? And it boils down to the absolute baseline of what this society is actually built on. And until we actually deal with that, and that's when you get into like, what is the history of racism in this country? Why like so much stuff that we are just not even educated on as a society. Until you start addressing that, layoffs are like up in the stratosphere and things we can even touch.
Yeah, absolutely. And to those points, we're in an era where it's obviously very contentious about whether or not those are even conversations that should be taught, like in schools or anything like that. I want to put up a comment from Sean because I think it's a good one. It addresses or talks about some of the things we're talking about here. But trying to keep the power of competition in, but build humanism and empathy into our orgs and businesses, tough balance.
That's
It's
exactly
interesting because
right.
I don't even know if they can be balanced, right? It's almost like they're
They can't.
diametrically opposed to one another. Like, how do you profit but also people? You need, because one is at the expense of the other. So how?
Like
Um,
well, it's Loki and Thor. You can't. One of them dies.
I'm
Like it's
keeping
like
Thor.
I
Yeah.
mean, he does look really good
It's
shirtless, so let's
dreamy.
do that.
It's
Uh,
dreamy, isn't he?
he's so dreamy. It's the Fabio hair. It's the Fabio hair. But it's like you can't, right? Like you can't. It's just as the dystopian that we're falling into is awful. The utopia that we're actually discussing that we'd like is actually unachievable. Like it's not a thing. So you have to find a happy medium. But what does that even look like? I don't think we actually know.
Yeah,
I
I
don't think
think
we
it's
actually know.
directional more so than destinations, right? Like, it's like, are we moving progressively towards a good ends, or toward a dystopian hellscape, or are we moving towards a better society? And biodiversity collapse, or end of capitalism. I don't know which is going to be better.
Well, I mean, this is why, right? This is why so many individuals or just groups, especially younger generations, are so against the idea of capitalism, because they have seen it and they've grown up with this idea, this methodology that is taxing humanity, right? It is taxing our livelihoods, and they don't want that. So then
Mhm.
when
Mhm.
you have these older generations who are feeding and benefiting and profiting off of this way of work, it is, you are quite literally asking them to give up their livelihood and give up what their own like ideals of success are. So it is something that yes, it's I don't think we're going to achieve it in our lifetimes, right? There is some very interesting research um and a theory called uh best possible selves. So when you start envisioning your best possible self down the line, right? You actually can start it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And they did this with, I think the research was done on high schoolers, is where they say, hey, imagine the best possible scenario for yourself. All the things go right. What does that look like for you? Where do you end up being? Now imagine all of the, imagine the inverse. What is all the bad things? How do you avoid and mitigate against those things, right? And as they figure those things out, as those individuals have figured those things out, they end up in a much better place than their peers have. And so I wonder if this is something that, organizations should be really focusing on, is rather than say, hey, 5 years down the line, we want to have X market cap, we can start looking at, hey, what is the societal impact that we want to have on communities? And this is something that a lot of
Love that.
particularly DEIB organizations are working towards, is stop measuring the bottom line. Or stop solely measuring the bottom line.
Yeah.
Right.
Measure the humanity piece. What is, when we talk about the revenue and the profiting off of your employees' well-being, how do we balance those two? That's how you balance it, because we have constantly measured the bottom line. Now let's start measuring the other pieces, like, the health of your employees. Let's start measuring the happiness of their families, right? Can we start
Mhm.
measuring those things? Can we start measuring how a company impacts its own community, right? Because
I love
right,
this so much.
right, because like you look at the other discussion I saw was Twitter headquarters right now, bringing it back to Twitter. They got so many tax breaks to stay in San Francisco, and the place in San Francisco is historically a poor part of town. So by almost forcing them to stay through tax breaks, it allowed to build the community up. But now, once you have no one going into, no one there, what does that do to the rest of the community? So we need to start including more input from the people around us. And if we can start holding companies accountable to those measures, to saying, hey, let's look beyond
Mhm.
the bottom line. What is the employee engagement? What is the employee support system engagement? What does the community engagement look like? Then I think that that's how we start balancing some of those things out.
So I do with clients that I work on in business and brand. I ask them a question. I say, what is something that your company is so committed to that it would continue doing it even if you never made any money from it? And it's part of my whole process of heroic branding. But the idea is like, put something else first. Like, don't tell me about every business. If you ask a business, like, what's your purpose? Profit and loss, right? Like, uninspired, don't care. Give me more. Let's just assume that is baseline. And to your point, like, what else could we measure? Measurement to me, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I'd be like measuring the happiness of my family. Ooh. But I do think prioritizing and making sure that that's part of the way we talk about everything that we do and that we keep it present. I have some clients right now where their culture is just so amazing. And partly it's because every meeting they reinforce what's important to us, and they make sure in the way that like people take time off and what, you know, what's going on in people's lives and what they, behaviors that they reward and behaviors that, you know, they endorse versus the ones that they try to course correct on. It's very clear where their priorities are. I think we have a crisis of priorities in a lot of ways. And again, that goes back to the systemic issue of like, we are about growth and we are about profit and this and that. And I think until we have a different set of things that we're out to achieve, and, you know, and you've talked about like the hellscape dystopia that we're racing towards, you know, I think just looking at climate change and biodiversity collapse is like two very clear things that are very tangible right in front of us. It's like, what good is it to have all of that money if the entire world that you're inhabiting is unlivable?
Right.
Which is like where we're heading towards. So I think it's just a crisis of priority. Like, what do we put first?
I love the idea, Chris, of corporate collectivism. Like I like what you were talking about. Like I love that so much because that's actually something that one of the things that annoys me. Let's go all the way back to the beginning of the conversation about LinkedIn and like what you talk about there and everything else. One of the things that often annoys me about some of the leadership voices or folks who are trying to get into the leadership spaces, they talk about how, well, it's very hard to sell things that you can't measure to the C-suite. Like, how are you going to measure vulnerability? How are you going to measure kindness? How are you going to measure? And to me, it's like, that's not what you're measuring. What you're measuring is the effect of what happens when you don't have it. Right? Like, you're measuring the effect of what happens when you don't have it. And because you can measure that. You can measure that in terms of employee well-being from a physical perspective, from an emotional perspective, from a mental perspective. You can measure that in terms of retention. You can measure all of these things. And my thing has always been, if you find that you have a C-suite that you're talking to where you're trying to sell human centricity and they're like not interested because we can't measure it, I'm like, that's the red flag you want to see. Right? Yeah. To your point, like that's Jeff, the thing that you ask is like, what is the thing that you would continue doing without if you make no money? And they come out and they go, I don't know, ping pong. You're like, oh shit.
Yeah.
You know, like, let's not do that. So, but I love the idea of, it's almost like forced community thought, right? From a corporate perspective, which is like, don't just measure the P&L, the profit and loss. That's great. You need it. Like, you need money to keep a company open. Like, this whole like company should do without profits. Come on, y'all. Like, that's not the vibe. Like, that's not how again, remember a three-cornered house. We live in it. Capitalism has to stay afloat or everything goes to shit. So money, we need it. But what else can we measure? And I love that thought. I'm actually, my brain is going wild with ideas of how you would measure that and how you can implement that, but it's actually something you can measure, which I really, really, really like. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, the some of the work that we do at Indelible Impressions, right, is that we very often, as we engage with clients, is we will ask them, hey, who are your community partners? And part of that is because we do also work with nonprofits. So they have, you know, vendors and again, community organizations that they work with. But it's important to get their feedback to say, hey, these are the things that this organization does well from an equitability standpoint, from a diversity standpoint, inclusion standpoint. Now, can we apply that? And we have applied that to, you know, for-profit organizations. It's just a matter of like making that a bit more widespread, right? Can we start applying that across the board? And I think that, you know, I don't know about the two of you, but I remember in school growing up always being like, capitalism, you know, like consumers, like they will back the companies with their dollars, right? And like I feel like we're especially seeing that now. Again, with the younger generations, they're like, I absolutely will not buy anything from that company because they don't stand for what, you know, what I stand for. And so if we can get just people to say, we need you as a company to measure these things, or else we won't buy your product, we won't use your services, then that is something that we can do. And that's something that, again, yes, we may not be able to raise all of society and start from ground zero, but what we can do is demand better. And we can start saying, hey, like 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 people, a million voices are gonna move the boat where we say it needs to go to.
It's so funny because you've both of you in the last two things that you've said have both said something to the effect of like keeping this system in place. Like it's just kind of like what's going to happen. I think I'm a little bit more of like a burn it all down and start over. In this group, I'm the one that's like, oh, I don't know, maybe we should just burn the whole thing down and start
Okay,
it all over.
Thanos.
Yeah, I know. I have a doctor.
Okay, Elon. Like, okay, Elon.
I mean, not quite like that, but you know what I'm saying. But so where was I going to go with that? I forgot my point. You threw me off. My ADHD just took me in a whole nother level.
We threw comics and geekism.
Right.
Yeah, and then I was like, oh, Thanos and Doctor Doom, and then Wolverine. And yeah, I just went into like a whole thing. So I forgot exactly what I was going to say, but I was going to touch on something you both said, and now it's gone.
That's okay. I think, and I'm bringing this all back to the concept of layoffs and where we are right now. It's to me, the thing that is starkest in all of this is just how willing we are, and I mentioned this previously, but how willing we are to praise the absolute bare minimum. Like
100%.
Like that Stripe letter when it first happened, like the Stripe layoff letter, where the CEOs took responsibility for the fact that they did all this, and then then we are going to fire a whole bunch of you, but we're going to give you good severance, or you're going to keep your health insurance, and and everybody's like, oh my God, look at how great it is. Oh my God. And I'm like, y'all, this is what should always happen. This should be so common. Like this shouldn't be a thing.
But it's against the backdrop of like absolute demons. The ones that are like, you're fired now and you get nothing.
Right. But Jeff, just because you're in hell doesn't mean you need to praise the devil. That's true. Stop.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. That doesn't make any sense. It's like saying, well, I'm really it's kind of like the people who after a layoff go on LinkedIn again and go, I still have my job, but I feel really bad for everybody else who got laid off. It's like,
or what about the guy that was crying? We had to lay off.
Oh my God, the crying CEO.
Yeah.
Like to me.
Won't someone think of the CEOs?
Right. Well,
it's so hard for us.
I'm sorry, but here's the CEO who took the Stripe CEO who took responsibility for the thing. Good, you should, because it was your corporate greed born of a pandemic that killed millions of people that had you hiring recklessly, thinking of future profit instead of current need. Congratulations on coming to that human realization. And then you have Mark Zuckerberg who did the same thing. During the pandemic, we thought we were going to need all this stuff, and we were proven wrong. Congratulations on coming back to Econ 101. You shouldn't be praised for understanding bare minimums and for coming to the realization that you were too greedy for your own goddamn good, and now you're going to wreck 10,000 people's lives.
Hilarious, though, that he thought it was, virtual cubicles was going to be the ticket.
Listen, I have so many thoughts and opinions.
That's what we want.
Right,
virtual cubicles.
Everybody wants a cubicle
with no legs.
No legs.
No legs.
No legs. Cubicles, no legs.
No legs, never any legs. It's, but that's what I'm getting at. I feel like the reason we keep getting ourselves into this mess more and more is because we praise these behaviors like they're outliers when they really should be, because they are outliers. We praise them because they're outliers when they really should be the bare minimum. We should, to your point, and I can't remember now, which I think, Chris, it was you. It's we need to demand better. This should be baseline. Everybody should do this. When I got laid off and fired, Chris, you got 1 week, I got zero. And I got lured into a meeting I wasn't even told we're going to be doing some layoffs. I got lured into a meeting to talk about bonuses for my team. And then my boss ran in with a script that he read. And then after he was done, he was like, do you have any questions? And I was like, no. And he goes, okay, have a nice day. And boop, closed the Zoom. That was my experience. How fucked is that?
That's
right?
horrible. That's
So it's like to me, that's the main problem is we keep praising the bare minimum like it's praiseworthy. It's not praiseworthy. And we're not going to get to corporate collectivism until we fucking stop praising the bare minimum like, oh, congratulations for taking responsibility for your greedy actions.
Well, this
Stop it.
is also why we need to shift. And when I say shift, I don't mean like a little tiny shift. It's like we gotta like turn the boat like all the way over there, right? Like it's like when we
Come
talk
to
about
my side. I am
right, like
Thanos.
right, like when we talk about developing leaders, we need to stop with the crap around technical skills and expertise. If you want leaders, you have to focus on the human people side of business. And that is what great leaders do. You can have
Mhm.
managers, that's fine. But if you want leaders, if you want to build and develop people, they have to care about people. They are dealing with people. They have to care about people. That, like, I cannot understate that. If you are
Yeah.
dealing with people and managing people, you have to care about people, because the
You
only
have to,
way at,
yes.
even if you are someone with like low empathy, low EQ, you can still be a great leader and care about those people because you need them to get the work done anyway. So you have to develop those skill sets. So no matter what, like, we have to say, great, you're good at your job. That doesn't mean you're going to be a great boss. For you to be a
Right.
great boss, you got to develop these other skills. And how do we, again, I'm going to bring this back to measurement. How do we figure out who cares about their people? Let's talk to the people that they work with and say, hey, does this person embody the values of who we as a company see as a good leader? If they are, awesome. Let's start developing them, giving them, and then give them those technical skills that they need, and then bring them up. Technical skills
Right.
can be taught. I'm horrible at woodwork. I'm sure I can figure it out. But if you talk about, hey, how do you have a good one-to-one conversation and get someone to feel psychologically safe? I know I got that, right? Like, I'm
Mhm.
good.
This is interesting because like I want to tie together 2 points that you've made, which is that like, teaching leaders to be people first. Like that's one thing. And we all agree on the importance of that. And we could all, talk till we're blue in the face about how that actually also has business, financial, bottom line impacts, right? We could all do that. And then Chris, you brought up the thing before about making like conscious buying decisions as consumers, like letting the consumers in the market help to dictate where the market goes and how things change. I think the cynical side of me in thinking about both of these two ideas is that just take the consumer side first. So you build this brand, it's very like green and friendly, and it's all the things that we want as consumers. Like, and I'm saying we, like the people on this call, let's just say, we want these things. So we begin buying there. If that becomes successful, what's going to happen? They're going to get either immediately competed against by a big dog in the space, or they're going to get bought by that big dog. And then they can either shut that thing down, they can dilute it down till it's not what it once was, or they can keep it going a little bit while still running their other enterprises. Now the bigger entity that's causing all of the harm is now profiting from the thing that we all really wanted. So that's on that side. On the leadership side, same sort of thing. You got great leaders. You have a business department that's doing well. Well, what happens when the private equity firm comes in, buys up that company that's doing well? It's got great profitability, great numbers, great team. And they decide, you know what, we want to squeeze more out of it. We want 40, 50, 60% returns on this. Now, all of a sudden, that great leader is stretched to the edge. They're so stressed out that they don't have the time for those conversations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Down the line, this whole idea falls apart under the weight of a system that demands returns and profitability. And anytime you have that, there's going to come a point where you have to decide. And this, Chris, I think this is why I love the fact that you hold the banner of like people first leadership, because there's no ambiguity to that. There's no way that you can misunderstand what we're talking about here. Putting the people before anything else first, then profits and everything else. And in that model, you have to compete against profit first companies, and profit first companies are probably more well capitalized, and they'll probably buy up your people first company and they'll squash it and crush it in whatever ways that they can. So I'm cynical, but at the same time, I'm not going to stop doing this work. I'm not going to stop beating this drum. And I know neither of you are, but how do either of you kind of like, I guess, find a middle ground between like the reality of the crushing weight of this system versus doing the right thing and knowing also that even the system would benefit from adopting these better postures?
That's such an interesting question. And if you'd asked me that, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna give an example of something I did with my team earlier this year, right? Is we the business was asking us to churn out a ton of work in a very, very short amount of time, right? And for me as a leader, right, while this isn't layoffs related, it is demanding more productivity out of my team members in a shorter amount of time. It still comes down to bottom line, right? And so it was about having one-on-one conversations with my team to let them know, hey, this thing is happening, right? This is what like we're trying to achieve. If we like, what can we do? What can I do individually as your leader to help us get through this? This is the expectation, and this is when we expect it to end, right? And I saw it as a like a 1.5 week, 2 week max, where we're gonna have to probably put in like 60, 70 hours a week versus like 40, 50, right? And so as leaders, we have to insulate, right, those that we lead. Otherwise,
Yeah.
all that weight comes crushing down, right? And so for us as leaders, again, part of being a people first leader is taking on that additional burden of emotional and mental kind of heaviness and weight. So that way it does not necessarily it doesn't crush the people that we're working with and that we're leading.
But again, this is what I find so problematic about that is we all do that. Like I too have a team, right? Like my yelling about leadership and people first, like that's a side gig. I have an actual like, 40-hour a week job, 40, 50-hour a week job that I do. And I do the same thing. Or I have done the same thing in the past. I haven't had to do it at my role at Penguin Random House, which has been great. But here's the thing that I
That makes
find
me
very
so happy, by the way, because I was like, I just met you prior to that. And
you
it
did.
makes me really happy. And I've been like following your journey there. And it makes me genuinely curious about the company because of the way you speak about it and your culture and
Mhm.
all those things. Like, I think that,
It's
yeah, like
it,
having a great
it's
culture leads to people like you going out there talking about liking your company. And that's
correct.
a thing.
Correct. It's a fucking thing. Like it's is it perfect? It absolutely is not. It's not. Because no company is. Like you're asking a lot of a company for perfection. Like it's not. But it is hands down the most psychologically safe, willing to admit its own mistakes. Talk about, I mean, just last week we had a whole hour and a half long workshop on how to become better anti-racist, like truly become better anti-racist, like pointing out things we've seen within the organization, within ourselves, within our teams, and how can we combat that? And how can we, like, that doesn't happen. Like, what? Like, that's not a thing. Like, I've never been in a conversation like that before in a corporate setting, ever. It was incredible. It's an incredible place to work. And I'm so thankful that, because I was very much ready to never go back into corporate America again. And when this job came knocking, I was like, really? I was like,
Yep.
well, I can always quit and go back to yelling about leadership full time if that's what happens. Um, but here's what I'll tell you, Chris, about what you were saying is the expectation that good leaders will be that shield, will be the absorber of all of that pressure only to diffuse it for our teams is why good leadership is actually so hard to find, because good leadership is mentally taxing, good leadership is emotionally taxing, good leadership is physically debilitating. Sometimes I went into burnout being a good leader because I was shielding my team from so much at a previous organization. And so to me, when you were telling your story, I was like, the problem here is not that you needed to shield your team. The problem here is the unrealistic expectations that your company was putting upon you that prioritized profitability over people. Like that's the problem. Like I know where you're coming from with it. And I would do the same thing. It's like I would have those one-on-one conversations with my teams. I would explain, I would do contextualized transparency. I would give the why, I would give the reasons, I would give the timeline, I would give support. And then I would go and fucking crash because I'd be so exhausted by the emotional wear down
Mhm.
of what I just had to do. So again, it goes back to companies needing to have an awareness of what it actually is to treat the people on your team like humans, because until you do, it doesn't matter how much you measure anything. If at any given moment you turn around and you go, and by the way, we need you to produce 7 months of work in 2 days. Go. You
Yeah.
know?
I mean, this goes to, responsibility. And I know that this is something that we had touched on before, is whether it's layoffs or whether it's, hey, crunch time responsibility, leaders, executives say, I'm responsible. But I don't think they know what that word means. That word does not mean what I
Ah,
think
It's like
man.
it is.
Inigo
I was
Montoya.
just
Inigo
thinking that, Anne.
Montoya.
I was just,
Yeah.
I was like, I have so many
It's
gifts
gonna-
at my disposal, but I don't have that one. That word.
I can
don't think it
do it.
means what
Hold
you
on,
think
hold-
it means. Oh, you can do it?
There you go. What kind of? I do not think it means what you think it means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Right? But
can
like,
kind of do it.
I just watched that the other night, by the way. Just randomly, I watched Princess Bride the other night. Anyway,
I'm
say
so
that.
ready for my daughter to watch that, by the
So
way.
good.
Yeah. But that's what I'm saying is they say it, but they don't actually mean it. Right. And that's the other thing that I think irks a lot of people and pisses people like the three of us off is
Mhm.
that you are taking responsibility, but there's no negative effect to your salary or bonus at the end of the year.
It's the thoughts and prayers of the corporate world.
Yes, it is.
It's the
Absolutely.
thoughts and prayers of the corporate world. Well, and that's the thing, right? Like that's the thing that bothers me is, and oftentimes it's not even willful or neglectful ignorance. It's just you don't actually know what goes on the ground. You don't actually know what it means when you say, "Hey, let's speed up this deadline from." By the way, I hate the term deadline. This target date from like 3 months from now to a month. Like, let's just do that. Like, we can do that, right? We've got the ability. And because they're the C-suite, the executive, everybody's like, and then they turn around and they start freaking out. It's like, to me,
Come on, guys, we're a family here. Let's do it.
we're a family. We're a family, y'all. Families are dysfunctional for the most part. That's why we don't measure the happiness of our family. But here's my thing. Like much like we vote with our dollars on what corporations we actually endorse and we don't. We should also start vote, and not everybody can do this. So I'm aware of the immense privilege that I'm wielding right now when I say this. But we should also be wielding with our labor when we choose which corporations we're going to support and which we are not. And if we continue to see, because the problem is when we continue to work for toxic organizations, we perpetuate their existence. When we keep protecting our teams and we try to create insular safe spaces for them because everything is on fire, but not here, not here, what we are actually doing is perpetuating the existence of the flames. We need to say, no, thank you. I'm done. Like, say when, like, I'm done. I'm leaving now. I'm leaving now.
And if I can close that loop real quick to what we started with Twitter and layoffs, we saw that in the last 12, 24 hours, right?
We did.
Mr.
Everybody was like, deuces.
Yep. Here's an ultimatum from the top. You're either in it to be in a crap organization and crap culture or get the hell out. And a lot of people said, I'm out. See ya.
Deuces.
They're like,
Have the
proud
day
of what
you
I built
deserve.
here. See ya.
Right.
The other side of it that I think is an interesting solution to this potentially, and we're seeing it, is the mass unionization efforts, which is there are a lot to your point, Anne, that there is a lot of privilege in choosing who you work. Like I work for myself and I will gladly fire a client if they're awful, or I will gladly not take on a client if it conflicts with my values, but I have an immense privileged position to be able to do that. A lot of people don't. You're stuck in a job. Chris, you gave the example of people at Twitter with visas. I think another remedy to that is organizing them. When you shift the balance of power between owners and laborers, and you change it to the laborers to have that power, now all of a sudden they can either fire everybody, which they really can't do, except, Elon's testing that theory. Or, you begin to find that the working conditions have to get better because there's more leverage because of the collective efforts. So I think that's another potential remedy, and we're starting to see more and more of it.
Yeah.
100%.
And ultimately there's lots of ways to go about this. And I wish there was a way to nicely wrap this up as we come upon our 60 minutes of delightful banter, but there isn't. Like the fact of the matter is there isn't. But what there can be out of all of this is it feels like we're very much at a tipping point. It feels like we're very much at a crux and for so many things. And what we can bring to all of this is a heightened, like radical awareness, radical self-awareness of what we are doing, what we are supporting, what we are not supporting, what we are willing to do and not do, and how we are willing to put our privilege on the line to affect change. And I think that's really the biggest takeaway out of all this is like stuff can be so fucked as fuck. But what we can do is be aware of it. And what we can do to solve it and what we can do to make a difference and what we can within ourselves start pointing out. See something, say something. Radical self-awareness filled with privilege on the line. That leads to change.
I love it. Chris, closing statements as we come upon our time.
Well, I mean, I'm just going to say what I've been saying is people are not business decisions, right? People are not, right? Like, they are people. Like, just stop. Just stop. So if you're, whoever's watching this, please remember people are not business decisions.
And I'll echo that and say all business is personal. Everything that we do is people doing stuff with people. And yeah, aside from that, go buy my book. It's really good. I love you too. Honestly, love talking with both of you. I would do this all the freaking time. Oh, thank you, Chris. Yeah, you're man.
Mine is actually my bookcase. I have a different one at my desk right now, but it's over there.
Nice. Thank you. Well, I love talking to the two of you. I would do this all the time with you both. I love hearing both of your perspectives. I always learn so much from both of you, both when we're talking in person and just following you both, on the internets. So keep doing the internets thing. And let's do more stuff like this. I still have to have both of you onto my podcast. I've just been like behind with all that because I had a newborn and like a crib back here, and like podcasting was real difficult when he was right there.
We saw there's a whole ass newborn behind you.
The whole newborn. It's happening. Yeah.
Whole newborn,
it's a whole entire newborn. Yeah. Well, love you both. Newborn. Thank you for getting together. Chris, thank you for suggesting this, and thank you for jumping in. And yeah, let's do more of this. Thank you both for being you.
Bye, y'all. Thank you.